Okay. So, good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are. I would like to welcome you to the second online panel within our symposium, Diversity and Cultural Inclusion in the New Music Canon here at the Goethe Institute, Boston. My name is Jörg Süßenbach. I have been the director of the Goethe Boston for about a year, and before that I was the head of the music department at the Goethe Institute in Munich. There, in my former function, I helped initiate the project A Post-Colonial Recherche with Clemens Thomas of Ensemble Recherche, which under the curatorial direction of Bongani and Dodana Brain and Elisa Erkelens brought together 10 composers from the so-called developing countries for an artistic exchange with the musicians of the Ensemble Recherche. Arriving here in Boston, I quickly realized that the topic of diversity in the arts, and especially music, is also of considerable importance here. And so we were excited to take advantage of Ensemble Recherche Harvard residency to organize an event based on their experience with the Postcolonial Recherche project with additional international perspectives. It was just as important for us to engage in conversation with creatives here in New England to learn from their projects, perspectives, and experiences. Since these topics are very complex and can be assessed from many different perspectives, it was important to us that we develop the program for the symposium together with a steering committee consisting of international experts. The final program includes 2 online panels, an internal think tank workshop with Boston-based and Ensemble Recherche musicians and some online presentations. Finally, a concert with the Ensemble Recherche. Yesterday, we had a very inspiring opening panel with Bongani and Dodana Brain, Harold Kisiedo, and John Silpayamanand, which in the case that you haven't been able to take part, could be retraced in a few days on our website. Yesterday night, there has been an analog think tank workshop at the Goethe Boston, which brought members of the Ensemble Recherche together with representatives of various local ensembles, performers and composers in particular, and they exchanged ideas directly, discussed further strategies as well. A summary of this exchange will be published as well. Also online on our website, we are building a showcase with works by ensembles from Boston and beyond linked to this theme. An important part of our symposium is the concert tonight featuring the Ensemble Recherche and their Post-Colonial Recherche project here at the Goethe Boston. Recordings of selected works will be added to the showcase at a later date. After this little introduction, things will get a bit more specific when the 3 ensembles, Ensemble Recherche, with a focus on their Post-Colonial Recherche project, which is inspiring this symposium, the ICE Ensemble from New York and the Kasseler for Skins from Boston report directly on their experiences and strategies in this field. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone involved. First of all, my wonderful colleague Annette Klein, who has done a fantastic job as a program curator in Boston for the past 15 years and has been instrumental in setting up and running these series of events in this symposium, but also all our partners from the steering committee like Ashley Gordon, artistic director from the Kasseler for Skins, Bongani and Clemens from the Ensemble Recherche. And Clemens will later moderate the discussion. Thanks for that as well. And of course, many thanks to all the participating musicians, composers, and ensembles, which will share their experiences with us. Thank you so much. But now we are happy to welcome 4 guests who will discuss the question what the process of diversifying new music repertoire does look like in their practice. First, Bongani and Clemens from Ensemble Recherche will present their work and especially the Post-Colonial Recherche project. And afterwards, George Lewis will give insights in the work of the New York-based ICE Ensemble. After a 15-minute intermission, we have the chance to listen to Ashley Gordon from Kasseler for Skins in Boston. And afterwards, Clemens will, as I said, will moderate a discussion between the panelists. You, as a guest here, are welcome to write questions and comments into the chat, which will be passed to the participants after their presentations. And after the third presentation, as I mentioned, Clemens will moderate a final discussion. But before we start, let me introduce you shortly to our panelists. Our first two panelists, only short CVs. You will find the longer version on our website. Let's come to Bongani. Bongani is a composer from South Africa and has written a wide range of music encompassing symphonic work and opera. For example, he's the composer of Winnie, the opera based on the life of Winnie Mandela. He graduated with a PhD in music composition from Rhodes University and was appointed to fellowships at Radcliffe Institute of Harvard and the Institute of Sacred Music at Yale. Clemens studied composition and harpsichord at the Musikhochschule Freiburg. Clemens' portfolio includes vocal and musical theater pieces, as well as site-specific compositions for concerts in a mine or on a bus, and installation works. Clemens critically engages with contemporary culture and thinks about future forms of collaboration, art making, and education. He has been artistic manager of Ensemble Recherche since summer 2019. That's the moment to pass on to you, Bongani and Clemens. I'm so happy that you're with us, and I'm really excited to look to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jörg, for having us, for inviting us. It's great to be here today with Bongani to present our project, Post-Colonial Recherche. And Bongani and me, we are going to present our project in the next 20 minutes. And I will start a bit with the background, so how it all started and why we as Ensemble Recherche, as a, let's say, quite a traditional contemporary music ensemble, are engaging in this issue of diversity and yeah, why we started this project. So first of all, what we created with Post-Colonial Recherche together with our curator, Bongani Dodane-Preen, is a virtual community of artistic research and music creation. So we had the cooperation partners of Goethe Institute and the media partner of German Public Radio. And it started all like 2 years ago in 2020 as an initiative by the music department of Goethe Institute. Back then, Jörg Süßenbach was head of the department, and they asked us, or they asked all German-based ensembles to continue international collaborations despite the COVID pandemic. So that was kind of the reason why we had the facilities and the possibilities to start this project. So we thought it might be the opportunity, the possibility to diversify our repertoire. And by this, we created the project Post-Colonial Recherche, and we published an open call spread over local Goethe institutes and addressed to composers and sound artists from transition and developing countries. So basically from the global south, but also from some other developing countries like Ukraine, for example. We as Ensemble Recherche had the aims to create a community of artistic research about post-colonialism and its consequences, and creating a community of fellows with the fellows to exchange on local perspectives on a more global level. Another aim was to promote and support these 10 selected composers by giving them a voice, respectively a stage. So using the power and also the reputation of Ensemble Recherche to showcase some new interesting names who are not yet present in Europe. And another aim was to diversify the ensemble's repertoire and discover these new compositional approaches. I think one aim was also that we wanted to question ourselves, because as I said, Ensemble Recherche is quite some historical, let's say, European ensemble. So we wanted to gain awareness for our European perspective and our European responsibility. And that being said, we published the open call. We got some 70 applications suitable to the formal criteria. And together with curator Bongani Dodan-Preen, we had a selection committee with other composers and curators in there. We were 5 people in the selection committee. We were Bongani, me as artistic manager of the ensemble, and we had Sarah Abasari, composer from Tehran, Iran. We had Elisa Erkelenz, curator and journalist from then International, and there was Johannes Schellhorn, who's a teacher at University of Music Freiburg. And I think Bongani might add some few comments on the selection process and our first remarks on the selection process.
Thank you, Clemens, for establishing the background. We had these applications, about 70 of them, and from all over the Global South. And we had this choice of, in this program, one thing that struck me is the unequations from the Global South, particularly coming from, sort of spot a difference between some of the work coming from South America versus the work that we have here in Africa, and I think it really pointed out tertiary education in Africa, in other parts of the Global South, have an advantage in having access to teachers, to mentors. Clemens, you want to point that out as well?
Sorry, was this a question to me? I just, it was a bit grainy. Sorry. Could you repeat, please, Bongani?
Of the selection, going through the application, how we spotted this very uneven trend amongst the applicants.
Yes, absolutely. So I might take over. We got, for example, as Bongani was saying, we got some quarter of all the applications was from African continent, but there were only one application from Eastern Africa and 18 from Southern and Western Africa. So I think what Bongani was mentioning is that if we go deeper into where the applications came from, we see the inequality of the education system, that there are certain countries with better education system, so they have some possibilities to apply for such a program. And yeah, but when doing the selection, we tried to be aware of these balances, let's say, and I think it was because of this, it was so important that Bongani, but also Sarah Abasari were part of the committee board, so that we had different local perspectives on this issue. And especially Bongani, of course, had a really strong voice for all the African composers, and could also give us, the other members of the selection committee a little background and context, and that was so useful. So thanks again, Bongani, for this. So.
Can I just add a remark there, Clemens?
Please, of course.
I know just my connection is so poor today, I don't know why. But there was there were some applications which were very, very strong that came from, and it was such a pity for us that there are some composers that could not fit into this program because it is designed around the instrumentation available for Ensemble Recherche. So I think all of us decided that should actually make a opportunity where these vocal composers can be accommodated. Fellowship program, and I think you should take the lead on that one.
Yes, so let me give you a short idea how this program was designed. So it was, let's say, 1 year program for these 10 selected composers. So we published the call last summer. We selected the composers until September 21. So last year we selected the composers in September, and then we had in total 10 days of virtual residencies. So virtual residence means we had some Zoom conference with additional audio plug-in. With this, it was quite some good audio connection to enable also musical rehearsals in good quality. We had the difficult or the challenge, let's say, that we had like really different time zones of the fellows. So Annette just posted a link with all the fellows in the chat. Thank you very much. You can see that people were coming from like Hong Kong in the eastern part of the globe till Peru. So it was really like we had a difference of some 12 hours, which means that we had to split the group into eastern part of the globe and western part of the globe. Because it was just not possible to meet everyone at one time. And the only little time it was possible to meet was like 2 hours. So for one, it was really early. For the other ones, it was really late, obviously. And this meeting time altogether was around the European lunchtime, let's say. We had in the morning a session with the Eastern globe composers. Then we had all together meeting, and in the afternoon, it was the Western part. And everything got recorded and uploaded because for some fellows, it was difficult with internet connections, etc. And within this timeline of 10 days, we had 4 residencies, 4 periods to meet. First one was just 1 day of kickoff. We got to know each other and had some background lectures and talk about what does this topic of post-colonialism means to you on really individual level of your biographies and so on. Then we had 3 times 3 days of really instrumental tryouts in the first time. Then the composers developed some first sketches of compositions. So we had rehearsals of these first sketches, and then when the pieces were almost finished, we had 3 days of rehearsals for these almost finished sketches. So it was kind of a work in progress concept, and composers could like really develop together with the musicians their compositions and try things out. Now,
Clemens,
yes,
if I can
please.
just add a comment
Please.
to that. Sorry, I think just for the connection from South Africa, I'll not use video. But during that process, most of these composers have not of the level of Ensemble Recherche. I know, for instance, some of the African composers who I was following very closely. I really appreciated that time to be able to work on things like multiphonics. Was so important in that way, in allowing the composers to not be limited by what's available in the community, but to be able to really spark their imagination. And also, I think part of the importance of this program is that we always think that folks have access to this quickly made very clear to all of us that what we take for granted in Europe and in North America is not necessarily readily available to people, for instance, in Lagos or somebody. Clemens, you want to go to the next topic, which is basically the impact of the project so far, and perhaps.
Yes. I think when it comes to like the aim of promoting and supporting these 10 selected composers, we have organized at least 2 performances of everyone's composition. And every piece will get a video recording for YouTube. So by end of the year, all the 10 new pieces should be online on our YouTube channel. And most or some of the pieces will also be broadcasted by German public radio. And other than that, I think with like events like this, but also with like private talks to artistic directors and so on, we managed to create some buzz around this issue of diversity and of Ensemble Recherche engaging in this, so that that I think artistic directors of some German festivals who are now thinking they should also do something about diversity. Maybe we can later talk a bit about this general development. Let's say they come to us to ask for some advices and some like, could you give us some names? So I think we kind of created here some really community and some new competences, and we kind of brought these names into the contemporary music market of Germany. And I think that will have a key impact on the composers' careers. Maybe Bongani, you want to add something to this? No. Okay. Let me say that what was really interesting for us as Ensemble was that the fellows' backgrounds were really diverse, not only the compositional approach, but also how they related to the topic of post-colonialism. So there were some pieces which have a reference to tradition.
Yes, I was just so impressed.
Oh, I think Bongani kind of left the meeting, unfortunately. So I will just say that some of the fellows had some really reference to tradition, but at the same time, they also try to transform their local traditions into their own compositional language, which was really interesting because we not only learned these local traditions we didn't know so much about, but we also learned how the composers deal with it on really personal level. So, for example, there's a technique of the Incas. It's a knot writing. It's called quipu, and it's kind of forgotten language or a communication system how Inca writing was kind of transmitted. And one composer from Colombia used this quipu idea, this idea of knots, to connect the musicians with knots between each other. And another composer from South Africa referred to the lesiba, which is an instrument of the Basotho, which is a mountain people in southern Africa. So she was dealing with archive material, and she was performing some recordings and so on. So our musicians really got to know these kind of lesiba instrumental sounds, which was highly inspiring. But also, and I think that's also really important, there were some fellows who did not explicitly deal with the subject or who were dealing with the subject, but in a way that we could not read it as a reference at the first glance. For example, some fellows were using noise as a compositional material, but also I think I also saw him here on the list, Jabulo Fingula, a composer from South Africa, really interesting composer, really great and nice that you're here, Jabulo, today. Jabulo was referring to Arthur Rimbaud, the French writer. And at least, as I said, at first glance, this is not the thing which we as European would expect dealing with like local influences and traditions. But I think that's what we definitely learned. Most of the time, it's way more complex than what we expect. So I don't know, Bongani, are you back online?
Yeah, I seem to be back online again,
Wonderful.
but I just won't
so
turn
please,
on my video.
make a nice ending to our talk.
Well, I mean, as I said, like the conversations that were happening, amongst the fellows was just amazing. And also some of the fellows digging down deep into their own culture and traditions of where they come from in their parts of the world. In pre-colonial traditions, of course, Clemens, you've mentioned the piece with the quipu, etc. But I mean, there's this beautiful other work by MacArthur, for instance, about these prints, these fabric prints that are part of her culture, and how she used that pre-colonial sort of like traditional reference as the basis for creating her piece. Which basically is a sort of like, it is multi-movements, right, with each instrument becoming a soloist. The other important thing is the input lectures that we had from various scholars and artists. I remember Martin Sketzinger from NYU talking about complex mathematics that exists in African music. And I think the whole experience was to try and expose all the fellows to all the scholarship of pre-colonial cultures, and in a way to counteract some of the erasure that came with the colonial project. On a final note, yesterday, one of the speakers in the panel, Harold, who studied with you, George, I think used one of your terms called lifting this cone of silence. And I think this project with composers from such vast and different backgrounds in the Global South, I think is a curatorial intervention that will go some way towards lifting this cone of silence and perhaps, I suppose, enriching the new music community with all these new and diverse voices. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much. And I think we have a first question here in the question and answers. I invite everyone also to post their questions to the chat or to the question and answers. So I have a first question by Septian Twichayo. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right. So the question is, I don't know if the post-colonial theme is appropriate or not, because, for example, if the curatorial system is still based on scores or scores as one of the requirements, then it indirectly excludes composers who work without scores, such as some composers in Indonesia who come from local music backgrounds who do not work with scores. So I think that's really interesting question, all the question about notation and score-based music. And I think that was a major topic we discussed a few times, or which came up all the way with this project. Because at one point, I think Bongani once voiced it out, this issue of notation came to the colonies as a part of the colonization and as part of the of church music and so on. I guess you all guys know the important lecture by Kofi Agawu. And then Bongani said to him, it's like notation is basically the prison. So in a way,
it's a straitjacket. It's a straitjacket, some sort.
Yeah, in a way, it's a possibility for conserving the music in order that other people can perform it again. But at the same time, it's so much of a reduction, because leaving this leaving this system of notation is not possible in most of the countries where there aren't any performers who could like kind of read an alternative version of score-based music. We had one interesting talk by Sandeep Bhagwati, for example, who introduced us to his kind of like really innovative scores, but we also have a few fellows, Bongani already said, who are working with more like graphic scores or audio scores. So I think actually the composers, all the fellows, tried really to somehow deal with this challenge of notation. But maybe, please, George, could you add your remark you just wrote in the chat to everyone, please?
Oh, you mean just now, what I said?
Yes, please.
You know, I was going to say, I was just writing this, that, I mean, certainly one can work with methodologies in use by composers, whatever they are, whether it's improvisation or whether it's getting together to collectively create without scores or all these kinds of things. I mean, it's certainly possible. However, I do observe that the exclusion of Afro-diasporic composers, certainly from European stages, and not only stages, but critical accounts, educational institutions, that's been of long standing whether you have scores or not. And so it seems to me that to concentrate on a kind of a score, no score binary eludes or erases the larger issue, which where are the Black composers, period. And so it seems to me that actually looking for those scorers and trying to find people who are using them and trying to encourage them to do more, it actually ends up being a form of reparations, as far as I can see, a form of compensating for past erasures. Just a start.
I agree with George, but I'd like to add another comment, which I think echoes Kofi Agawa's lecture. Actually, I can't type it in. Maybe you can just, if you Google Kofi Agawa and colonialism on YouTube, it's a very interesting narration of how functional harmony played a role in shifting African music, in a different trajectory. And my opinion about this as an African composer is that we can't deny the colonial project, and we cannot deny the impact and the cultural collision that happened to that. You cannot undo these 200 years. So as best, I think, I know that some African composers like Akina Yuba's work and various others, J.H. Kwabena Kentia, who are like the pioneering generation of African composers here, melded those Western elements which came with the colonial project, and used them to express their own cultural identity and their own heritage above that. I just don't think we can undo what happened.
Yeah, maybe let me add what we tried to do when designing the open call, because we were aware of this issue. Because in most of the open calls, it's that the call is asking for scores. So we tried to have some flexibility here, so that people could send audio recordings, video recordings, all kind of graphic scores or PDFs or text or whatever. But so we had a variety of different things. Other than that, we had not only the material which was based on music, we also had a short video introduction of the applications, and we had an essay. So we tried to see the whole picture of the personality of the composer who was applying, and that was really helpful, I think. But I think this issue of notation is really important. So I'm really interested. I think we should move on forward, Jörg. But I hope that later in discussion we can continue and deepen this subject. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much to you, Clemens and Bongani. And I think there are some issues which we can take up for the later discussion. For example, I'm interested in what is the reaction of the musicians of the Ensemble Recherche, going on this journey and being confronted with these different types of notation and approaches to music. But we can talk about that later on. Thanks again, Clemens and Bongani. And let me pass to George and say a few words about him in the very beginning. As I said in my introduction, you can have a look on the website and you will see much more. So George Louis studied composition and trombone, and his work in electronic and computer music, computer-based multimedia installation and notated and improvisation forms is documented on more than 150 records. He's a professor of American music at Columbia University, where he serves as a chair in composition and faculty in historical musicology. George has been an artistic director of the International Contemporary Ensemble since April 2022, and this is one of the reasons why he's here with us. So thank you for being with us, George, and we are really interested and keen about hearing how the IC and your work as a director is linked to the topic.
Well, thank you, Jörg, and thank you also, Clemens and Bongani, for that extraordinary talk. And despite the technical issues, I certainly learned a lot. I'm going to share my screen for a little short presentation. Hopefully there'll be time for questions afterwards. Let's see how that works out. Does everyone see our little logo there? So I hope you're okay. Wave if you don't see or whatever. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I wanted to take a few moments to describe the recent and current and future activities of our group, the International Contemporary Ensemble, which was described as renowned just recently by the New York Times. And I would say that it's one of the most influential new music groups, maybe even in the world. It was founded in 2001 by the composer Wang Ro and the flutist Claire Chase. And we are 34 experienced musicians who perform in forces ranging from soloists to chamber orchestras. And we've developed and premiered over 1,000 works, both nationally in the US and internationally. Our educational activities provide workshops and performances of hundreds of works by student composers, and ensemble members have received many international prizes and awards, MacArthur Fellowships, Guggenheim Fellowships, Pulitzer Prize, Alfred Award of the Arts. And you can see our mission statement here. Again, we're a collective of musicians who are committed to creating collaborations built on equity, belonging, and cultural responsiveness. We strive to create a mosaic musical ecosystem that honors the diversity of human experience and expression by commissioning, developing, and performing the works of living artists. Now, as a collective, we're committed to advancing experimental music, and it's our responsibility in that light to challenge our biases and practices around who performs or has their works performed on the world stages. We acknowledge that Western classical music has excluded individuals based on wealth, race, sex, pedigree, background, gender identity, disabilities, sexual orientation, and much more. If that weren't the case, we wouldn't really be here. And we're actively making changes to all entry points to our organization, as you'll see over the next few minutes. We want to ensure in particular that Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color are represented throughout the organization and on the stages that we appear on, and that our operations, our staff, our decision-making structures support building spaces of belonging for everyone involved in the process of developing new music. So that's an interesting introduction. You know, I recently published an article in Van Outer National called New Music Decolonization, 8 Difficult Steps. And the reason why I actually accepted this position as artistic director of the ensemble, because I could see that that mission statement I just read was more than just talk. I mean, for years, well before the advent of Black Lives Matter, ICE has been actively confronting those issues. The ensemble continues to move decisively to combat the sensory deprivation, impoverishment, and devolution of the field of new music that has resulted from the consistent absences of the same ethnic, racial, and gender voices from stages, media, music histories, educational institutions, and professional networks. ICE is providing answers to the question of how music curators could start composing and improvising decolonization. We seek to provide a model for what a decolonized curatorial regime would look like, and our commitment to this is sustained and growing, but also of long standing. So the first of my 8 difficult steps asks us to move beyond kinship and invest in new populations. We want to encourage ensembles to commission and programming in diverse ways, including specific calls for composers of color and diverse genders, as well as historical and cultural themes that foreground non-majoritarian experience. For years now, ICE has already been investing heavily in new populations. Our open call, the call for blank program, Commission and Development Program, is an open call to sound creators from any discipline. We don't call for scores. We call for artists to give us aspects of what they would want to do of a processual nature. The artists we select receive the support of ensemble musicians, rehearsal time, video and audio documentation, marketing support, and a paid commission, all alongside performances of their pieces. So these are some of the people who have already have had their premieres done in just the past couple of weeks. Others are forthcoming. And well before the advent of our Call For program, ICE was already programming in diverse ways. You see here Du Yun, who won the Pulitzer Prize in 2017 for her opera Angel's Bone, which our ensemble developed and premiered. And Call For itself is the development of ICE Lab, which starting in 2014, almost 10 years ago, provided crucial early support for now prominent composers like Ash Fury, Marcos Balter, Phyllis Chen, Juan Pablo Carreño, Tai-Shan Sori, Laura M. Hindle, Monica Duncan, and Anna Torvalds-Dottir. Here's some more recent events. Mata Roberts is a commission, and that was one that we've been involved. Mata Roberts is a member of the ensemble. Our 4 Generations of Mexican Sonic Arts project, which was done back in 2008. Tai-Shan Sori's Perle Noire, a project around Rethinking Josephine Baker, which has been performed around the world at this point. Coming up this weekend, 2 events, the Iranian Female Composers Association concert at NYU Skirball, for those who can get to New York. And the very next day, Phyllis Chen will be presenting a global community artwork with personalized music boxes made by participants. And that's just a bit of the wide range of artists we work with and aesthetics. And I invite you to learn more by visiting that iceorg.org, that big black web address there. Now, in influential circles in European public life and media, and I learned a lot more about this by being a fellow of the Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin during the pandemic year of 2020 and 2021, where I helped the Ensemble Modern in curating a project of Afro-modernism in contemporary music. We featured 6 composers, Afro-diaspora composers, diverse in age, from Europe, Jesse Cox, Hannah Kendall, and Daniel Cadane. From Cuba and the US, Tanya Leon. From South Africa, Andile Kumalo, and from the USA, Alvin Singleton. So what we noticed that, as you'll see if you read this article, it's probably still on the web, issues such as decolonization, anti-Blackness, and white supremacy are often dismissed as an American problematic that European music really has nothing to do with. Now, this is a critic for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, of course, a very influential paper, who claimed in a review of the Ensemble Modern concert, the global dispute revolves around concepts such as decolonization and white supremacy. By bringing the main front of the current disputes into focus with the theme of Black music, Märzmusik, where this concert took place, simultaneously imported the American problematic. Now, there was an article recently in Le Monde Diplomatique which pointed to the Americanization of public life and a militantisme qui divise les classes populaires. Now, the odd thing is that there's no or hardly any data support that claim by government design. Social scientist Patrick Simon noted that, quote, the refusal to include ethnic categories in official statistics characterizes nearly all the countries of Western Europe. One claim made by European policymakers is that ethnic categories are rejected in order to promote national unity and avoid identity politics. However, as Simon writes, one may well wonder whether the negation of minority identities that prevails in the name of universalism is not often simply a tactic for consolidating the position of dominant groups. Thus, the title of one of Simon's articles on the French government's refusal to collect race and ethnicity statistics seems apt. He calls it the choice of ignorance. Now, realizing this, our ensemble developed Luigi, a powerful online management tool now used by a number of companies in and out of the arts. Among many other things, Luigi allows us to instantly track whether or not our actions are living up to our mission. It allows the generation of reports showing what repertoire and which composers have been performed since Luigi came online in 2014. We do not choose ignorance. And this screen, for example, shows the most recent and forthcoming events. You can see here the IFCA, the Iranian Female Composers Association, the Phyllis Chen workshop, the workshop with Louis Nielsen and Kevin Ramsey, part of the Call Forward program, and Henry Threadgill, a performance, and so on. So those recent upcoming events. So another one of my steps talks about diversifying school music programs to identify and recruit young composers, and not even young composers. I'm interested in composers of all ages because the exclusions have not been confined to the young. And so we're looking at people who are considerably established, but who have nonetheless been underrepresented. Now, you have to develop the fields you want to see. That's our view. It's not just a question of finding repertoire by underrepresented artists. You have to create the conditions by which the same exclusions and erasures no longer appear. So this is Ensemble Evolution. This is our hybrid summer music intensive. It's designed to foster a holistic understanding of the artist as global citizen. Through workshops, conversations, and radical artistic collaborations with the faculty and students, we engage in music making, community building, and creative producing. And with the following guiding questions: how do we discover and nourish new musical ideas? How can technology, as well as curatorial processes, make collaboration more open and inclusive? And how do we support one another in the creation and advancement of collaborative ensembles? Now, this is the faculty of the ensemble that you see here, as very diverse in many respects. And you can also see the guest presenters who are working on things like inclusion in new music, wellness and health, and other kinds of issues. And then this is the list of the participants. Once again, we do not call for scores. We call for people who, and a lot of the music that gets presented is not scored, although this has no problem with scores. But we realize, as was stated in the last panel, that by one of the questioners, that this could limit the scope of the participation. And you start to see that ICE realizes that Ensemble Evolution, we made this, it wasn't about creating a performance ensemble, but about bringing together, that's what ensemble means, a set of musical creators to further the evolution of our field. So another of my 8 difficult steps calls for strategies for rethinking curation, including engaging curators from non-maturitarian backgrounds. Now, even the present curators need to realize, and I think this is something that was very important, the collaboration between Ensemble Recherche and Bongani and Ndadana Breen, realize that, you know, curators, ensembles, institutions, they need to realize that they've not already been programming in diverse ways. You know, they might need some outside help to do that effectively. So our version of that was to come up with a curation task force. In 2020 and 2021, our curation task force brought together a group of artists to critically examine the International Contemporary Ensemble's decision-making, its vision, as well as what we feel is our future of what could be performed on the world stages, who performs those works and who makes decisions about what gets programmed. Now, educational ensembles, curators, educational institutions, news and information media need to work together to produce change, to combat that lifting, to lift that cone of silence, to combat the pernicious myth of absence that claims that the only reason why we don't see artists of color and women is simply because, well, no one's really around. So ICE integrates composition and performance with scholarship. Our 2021 Afro-Diasporic Opera Forum was a 3-day series of scholarly lectures and discussions to celebrate, explore, and share and reflect on the past, future, present, and future of contemporary Afro-Diasporic opera. Now, here are some of the events. There was the persistence of memory, talking about opera, Blackness, voice, and theoretical paradigms with Dr. Matthew Morrison, and Peril Noir, a conversation with Dr. Tyshawn Suri. There was 2 acts to this: Black opera composers in European classical music, constructing the operatic Afro-diaspora. And here are some of the forum bios. You see people, this is just a few of the people who are thinking hard about Black opera, including one of the preeminent scholars in that area, Dr. Naomi Andre, who wrote about Bongani and Ndadana Breen's famous opera, Winnie. So there's an explicit commitment to equity here, which for us includes equity in terms of the important meaning of investment. For example, ICE tries to develop long-term relationships with composers. And in fact, I myself am a product of one of those relations. Now, I received an instruction about this panel that we would focus specifically on composers and new repertoire. And you can see that I didn't really do that because with respect, that's really not enough. We see the project of decolonization as not just about diversifying the set of composers who get programmed, but also diversifying the staff, the board, the musicians, and all the projects that go out under our name. We look explicitly at gender, ethnicity, race, cultural provenance, sexuality, and much more. And we look for people who haven't been programmed by the ensemble before. We look at infrastructure, who gets major support. We try to look for erasures and ameliorating. We haven't found them all, so feel free to put more in our path. Now, but for me, the most important aspect, and this is the last of my 8 steps, was we need a change of consciousness. You know, some of the children of color being born right now will be writing a new sonic chapter in the history of the region and the world, one that recognizes with the philosopher Arnold I. Davidson, the true promise of new music decolonization. Multiplication of perspectives means multiplication of possibilities. With that in mind, we can start to redirect diversity talk toward new music decolonization talk. You know, but what keeps us, I was thinking, from realizing this promise? And I feel for some time now that there's a blockage of consciousness that's probably the greatest obstacle. And my fear has always been that diversity discourse has become rather conventionalized, DEI, a buzzword. It risks leading us to a prosthetics of inclusion, you know, like a clunky metal knee replacement, you know? But instead of that, I think you and I, need to invent a new incarnative we that understands contemporary music as more than simply a globalized, pan-European, white sonic diaspora. And if we can, this new we we're trying to create, can embrace our future, even with all its tumulus, if we can put ourselves conceptually in the situation of a Creole, you know, we can reaffirm our common humanity in the pursuit of this new music decolonization, because this is not just about a single project with us. This is about a new way of life, and it's about creating new ways of knowing. So I'm going to stop in just a second, but this is the last thing I wanted to say. I wanted to talk about what our name means. You know, unpacking the full name, International, that situates us in a cosmopolitan musical space where our community of sounds and values looks to engage with the entire planet. You know, the term contemporary leads us to embody a mosaic, creolized identity that challenges racialized genre and identity assumptions. Ensemble situates us as an organization that works to build new transnational communities. And, you know, we have this acronym nickname ICE or ICE, you know, and ICE, you know, you can see that. That simply means that what we're doing and where we're headed, we see it's not only crucial to the future of new music, but it's also very cool. And it's not to be confused with any other ICE you might have out there. So thanks, that's all I wanted to say. And thanks for listening. And I welcome questions.
Thank you so much, George. This was impressive input from your side. And as one of the people responsible for this little symposium, I realize that this is only a little step in comparison to that, what you're doing. And there's so much to learn and look on more intensive on what you're doing. And so I think it's very fruitful to all of us to listen to you and all this incredible bright and wide range of activities you presented. Let me have a look on the chat if there is a special question linked to you there.
Some of them, I see one that's kind of it's Facebook, you know. I'm not a Facebook user. I mean, the ensemble is, but I'm not. You know, if you want to hide something from me, Facebook is a good place to put it. But I'm going to click on this link anyway to see what Facebook has to say. And it says new voices from Indonesia, which of course is a great something to think about, because actually I have been working with I worked in the past with some of the older voices from Indonesia, like E. Newman Wenton and Pak Chopra, who went by at the time, and I was teaching with them in the 80s in the program on Music of Two Worlds at Simon Fraser University. So I'm fairly familiar with that side of Indonesian new music, and I'm also aware that there are other currents of Indonesian new music that are focusing on, I guess, contemporary music, whatever that genre really means. So, but I really appreciate getting that link, so we can perhaps work further with some of the newer people working in this way. So I also see something that says it's a way to make money. It's become corporate. I'd be willing to think about. I'd be willing to engage more about that. So if whoever wrote that wanted to say it's become corporate, I'm not quite sure what that means. I mean, the International Contemporary Ensemble is a nonprofit tax-exempt corporation. And the thing is, new music does need money, and our task is to create new music, but we also want to support artists in the production of new music to get funds for performers and composers. So making money is not necessarily the worst thing that can happen to people who are struggling to create new music. So that's my opinion on that, my response to that. Now, there could be others. I see here Indonesian Verpflichtungen, Musikwissenschaft, Verknüpfung, Musik, except cookies, nationale Verpflichtungen und internationalen Einflüssen. Yeah, well, I can buy that book because I have a subscription, Amazon DE. That's a pretty good subscription for me. Thank you, Stepjan Duikao, for sending that. Let's see, what else?
I think the others are more, oh, there's a last one coming up.
Let's see this. This is
oh, it's just a comment from Jaime.
Well, there's a very nice Chloe Louise Swindler published research in 2022 about 3 Black composers, Alvin Singleton, Regina Harris Biachi, and Alice Jones. And this looks like a doctoral dissertation of the UCLA, which, if anything, if UCLA has a great department, and it looks like a great committee. Steve Loza, Cheryl Keys. I'm going to be seeing them, by the way, in November, because I'm going out there to give talks and present pieces. So I don't know. This looks great. This looks like a great,
wonderful. Yeah,
please. And this is something we can all download. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for you, George, once again. And I think there are some topics we can pick up later on. Some topics we discussed, for example, yesterday evening as well in our workshop together with the Ensemble Recherche and musicians from Boston here. Education, for example, was a very, very intense, discussed, and I think important topic which could come up later as well. So as I suggested in my introduction, we should have a little break to have a drink or a coffee or something else.
Great.
And I think we should be back at 12:10, maybe not 10 minutes, only 6 minutes. So because we're running out of time a little bit, and we're really looking forward to hear Ashley then. So let's come back at 12:10 and see you then. Thank you so much. Oh, Ash, you're with us. Wonderful. So it's 10 past 12. That was, to be honest, a very short intermission, but better than nothing. I'm glad that you're all back with us again. And now we come to the third presentation of Ashley Gordon. Let me say a few words about her. Ashley is a co-founder and artistic executive director and violist of Castle of Our Skins, Boston-based concert and educational series devoted to celebrating Black artistry through music. Ashley has recorded with Switzerland's Ensemble Proton and Germany's Ensemble Modern, performed with Grammy Award-winning Boston Modern Orchestra Project and Grammy-nominated A Far Cry String Ensemble, and appeared at the prestigious BBC Proms Festival with the Chiniki Orchestra. She was panelist on conferences discussing topics of diversity in classical music, and is an instructor of teaching artistry at the Longy School of Music at Bard College. As I said before, this is only an excerpt of a biography, and you find more information about her on our website. Ashley, I'm happy that you're with us, and I think we're very interested in your presentation coming up now.
Thanks so much. It's an honor to be in such a luminous company here. I'll be sharing a bit more about Castle of Our Skins, which I am artistic and executive director of, and how we promote increased diversity and inclusion in new music, really all musics, but for this conversation, new music. Castle of Our Skins is half the age of ICE and about a quarter of the age of Ensemble Recherche. So we are a small and mighty, relatively newish organization. I have a presentation that I'll also share, which also has audio. So when I get to that point, if someone can just give me a thumbs up that you can hear. All right, can you see my screen with Castle of Our Skins? Hopefully on your side. I'll share a little bit about, as I said, the overview of what Castle of Our Skins is and what we've done these 10 years, and also our initiatives moving forward. And for me to share a little bit about the organization, especially if it's new to you, I think it really, the first place to start is the name. And the name comes from a poem for Nina, as in Nina Simone, the singer-songwriter, pianist, African-American activist. And this particular poem that Nikki Giovanni, who you see on the screen now, wrote in honor of Nina, paraphrase says, "If we're all imprisoned in the castle of our skins, let our skin be a palace, and we'll treat it with beautiful things, adorn it with beautiful things, cherish it, and be proud to live in it." So the idea of celebration is very central to our work and to our mission. Our mission really centers around cultural curiosity, and specifically as it relates to African diasporic cultures and fostering that. Celebrating Black artistry through music. I am classically trained in Western classical music as a violist, so a lot of string quartets and sort of falling into this vein, but music plus, I like to say at this point, so quite collaborative across disciplines with artists, with historians, etc., storytellers. And our effort really is to showcase a breadth and depth of African diasporic music making and history and artistry. So we engage quite often in historical context with historical events as well as composers, a wide geography as the diaspora is quite wide, and living composers as well as contemporary social issues. A lot of our work, let's see, I can't see the chat, so if there's something that someone can't hear or see, just please come off mute and go ahead and chime in. A lot of our work engages both on stage and off, but for our sort of performative arm, I wanted to highlight a few things as it relates to this conversation around diversity and cultural inclusion in new music. Pictured here as it relates to the caption of thought-provoking programming is a collaboration that we did in 2019 with new music cellist Seth Parker Woods here in Boston, and the program was called A Secret Desire to Be Black, where we performed the string quartet of the same name by Alvin Singleton, as well as Julius Eastman's Holy Presence of Joan of Arc for 10 cellos and dance, 2 dancers, one of which you see here. The Eastman was premiered in April 1981 at the Kitchen in New York with choreography by Andy DeGrout, and to our knowledge had not been performed, I guess, fully staged with choreography with dance since. So this was an opportunity to really collaborate and bring a historical lens to this particular project in a contemporary space that has, for those that are familiar with Isabella Stewart Gardner in Boston, a 3-tiered balcony, sort of cubed performance. So a little bit theater in the round, being able to play with the space there. Other projects that I would love to highlight and share include a Black Composer Miniature Challenge project that we started in the early days of the pandemic in 2020. We had a call in 2020 for 30-second miniatures for works for either solo or duo viola and piano. That resulted in 19 submissions from African diasporic composers ranging in ages from 9 to 60 plus, from the US, Canada, England, and Africa. Last year, 2021, we had our second call, again for 30-second miniatures, but this time for flute, being flute, piccolo, alto flute, and harp, solo and duo instruments. That resulted in 18 submissions from, again, African diasporic composers from the States, Brazil, Caribbean, Europe, and Africa. As they are short, 30 seconds eventually became 60 for some composers, but they're still on the short side. I wanted to play 3 of them for you. The first 2 you'll see were recorded as so many other DIY projects virtually, myself being here as the violist in Boston, and the pianist that you'll see, co-founder Anthony R. Green, being in the Netherlands, stitched together for remote performances. So just a thumbs up if you don't mind, to make sure that you can hear the audio, this one being for solo viola. Brief as again 30 seconds from Yaz Lancaster to showcase the diversity of some of the compositions that we received. Another one. That one being entitled A Day Passes, with electronics, obviously, by Che Buford. Interesting, certainly, to look back at these and see various hairstyles and various corners of my apartment. But in any case, one more that was not done remotely, but more recently for flute and harp. And again, just to showcase a variety of submissions that we received. Oh, so sorry. So I can bring that one back up. This one by Ahmed Al-Baka, again for flute and for harp. this project, which resulted so far in these two projects, will continue, and we have a call that will come out later this year as our third Black Composer Miniature Challenge project for works, again, 30-second compositions for soprano and cello. And we will invite composers of the African diaspora to create these mini compositions that set text of haikus and tankas, which are the sort of poetic miniature form, 30-second musical miniature form, that were created from our Black Poet Miniature Challenge project that we had last year, of which we had over 40 submissions from North America. All of these anthologies, the two that you just heard, the third for soprano and cello, and then a fourth which combines all instruments, violin, piano, flute, harp, soprano, cello, which will be for next season. All of those have resulted in the publication of an anthology. And the idea behind those publications, which are available on our website, allow for performers to create mini suites. So if you think of, for instance, the 44 duos for violin by Bartók, each one of those ranging from 30 seconds or so to a minute and a half, performers are able to create their own performance suite. Similar project with each one of these having about 18 at this point, 18 to 19 short compositions to create a set. We, with Kasselverskins, also during the pandemic, early days of the pandemic, launched a creative in residence program. We have always been a highly collaborative organization, as very prevalent in Indigenous communities, the idea of storytelling using various mediums. So yes, music, but also engaging with history, engaging with movement, engaging with spoken word. So from the beginning, we have always been highly collaborative. So we have a creative in residence program where we invite creative of any genre, of any discipline, of any practice to engage with us and co-curate for an entire season. So our very first creative that we had was in 2020, and we welcomed Zimbabwean composer, singer, Mbieda, multi-instrumentalist, educator, Tanya Radzwa Tawengwa. And we created, again, a video project that I'll share just a little bit of music about. And this project is very near and dear to her heart, and an extension of her praxis as being a storyteller, a culture bearer and a storyteller, an educator at heart. This particular project was part of a larger scope called Mwedzi, and talks about moon cycles and menstruation. But this particular performance that I'll share, again, just a brief showcase, is a project that Kasselverskins was able to support for our first inaugural creative in residence, of which we now have 3.
Msoro ane moyo munyoro wangu mutima azere nerudo ane pfungwa dzeba msoro ane moyo munyoro hande.
I share that as an example of, again, the breadth and depth of music and creatives that we support within our organization. I also wanted to share a little bit more, and since I have Bongani on the line, I would be remiss if I didn't share some music that we've performed at Bongani, and wanted to also just highlight that we are an ensemble in residence at the Laundry School of Music. I also teach a course on composers of the African diaspora there. And as a music ensemble, our relationship with the Laundry School of Music is to have a residency, an annual residency, where we highlight a different living Black composer each year, inviting that composer to engage with the students, giving master classes, lectures, lessons, etc. And as part of the residency, Castle of Our Skins presents a capstone portrait concert of that composer's music. In the 4 years that we've held this residency, we featured Trevor Weston, we featured Jesse Montgomery, last year Dr. Bongani Ndana Breen, and this December our co-founder and composer in residence Anthony R. Green. In an effort to diversify the school's library, all works that are presented in both the portrait concert and showcased in the student masterclass are purchased and added to the school's music library. So for every year that they're there, they're increasing that many more music scores for their students to engage with. I will share a bit from our portrait concert, which included music solely from chamber music and chamber music for strings and piano, solely by Dr. Bongani Ndana Breen, and a little plug that this will be available as a commercial recording with slightly different performers, one of which is a pianist, is Dr. Samantha Ege, who is a musicologist and scholar based in Oxford. Will be released later this month on October 28th as part of Black History Month in the UK. So just a bit from this performance here of his Safika. Give a little plug to the first violinist, Gabriela Diaz, who is the newest member of the ICE Ensemble. And for those that were involved in the think tank yesterday, last night, the pianist Sarah Bob from New Gallery Concert Series was also involved with us. I share, because I think music speaks so profoundly, as I think we all would agree being here. Again, the breadth and the depth that we try to engage with, not try, but that we do engage with. And in response to a conversation yesterday in the yesterday morning's panel around the intervention at the level of education is also being important. Such a huge aspect about what we do, both on stage and off, is education. And I wanted to share some projects that are in the works for the next several years that we are engaging in, specifically around culturally responsive pedagogy. So the first project is a 5-year project that we've engaged with the Boston Modern Orchestra Project, BMOP, and Odyssey Opera here, both based in Boston. And the sort of sister organizations are, for the next 5 years, going to perform semi-staged and record operas by Black composers, those composers being Anthony Davis, Nikir Okoye, not necessarily in this order, Ulysses Kay, Jonathan Bailey Holland, and the historic composer William Grant Still. All of the operas that they will be presenting include some sort of historical tie to Boston, with subjects such as Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, the Haitian Revolution, as there's a large Haitian community here in Boston, as well as Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. Castle Lovers Skins, for the next 5 years, will partner on the education front, so engaging quite directly and long-term with youth partners here in Boston. And then on a national scale, as the CDs will be both available digitally and to be purchased globally, to create culturally responsive K-12 curriculum guides for educators, available for free to be able to engage with both the music and the subject matters, again, globally. The other projects that we have similar local as well as national reach along the lines of early intervention and sharing out of music and history, specifically as it relates to the African diaspora. We are partnering here locally with the Boston Public Schools over the next 3 years to commission 18 Black composers from largely the states, so largely African-American composers, but not exclusive, to create choral, string, and wind ensemble works, again, over the next 3 years, for largely middle and high school student ensembles that will be premiered by Boston Public School Ensembles and published through Rising Tide Music Press, which is a relatively new publishing company specifically designed to promote the music of emerging Black and Brown composers. That project, again, will also, for all 18 of those works, have a companion curriculum guide. So any educator globally who purchases the music as well as the score and the parts will be able to have, regardless of their own personal firsthand account with relationship with the subject matter being from the diaspora, will be able to engage with authenticity, competently engage in authenticity, and be able to teach and program the works. We also have our own publications, 10 of which are being released this season alone, and include works by our own composer in residence, Anthony R. Green, that have been written over our 10-season history. And these include a teaching artistry project for solo narrating violist that uses original music, poetry, and interaction to tell the stories and legacy of 9 different figures in Black history, as well as 6 pieces for professional string quartet and student string ensemble that center spirituals, folk song, the idea of freedom and abolition. All of those works also have culturally responsive curriculum guide, so lesson plans for K-12 engagement, again, so that educators can take not only the music, but also the history and the context that is being touched upon through the music, and use in a greater sort of sharing out of on behalf of humanities and social studies and culture and history. The last thing that I guess I'll share at this point before a wider conversation is, for us, the concept of new music. Most everything that we perform, whether it was written today, it was a commission, whether it was written 500 years ago, for a majority of our audiences, it is new, and therefore it is new music to their ears. So it is that much more imperative that we provide context, that we provide a sense of familiarity, that we provide a sort of human approach to what it is that we're presenting. So it's not enough that it's just music by Black composers, but there's a story attached to it. There's a sentimentality attached to it. There's intrigue and wonder, and again, the sort of humanness of the music. So we treat all of our programming, whether again on stage or off stage, in a way that is designed to build familiarity and to normalize the approach of what may be considered and sort of lumped under the, to someone's earlier comment, the sort of corporate aspect, the catchphrase aspect of DEIA and belonging. We live and breathe this work 365, 7 days a week, in an effort to really normalize these practices of sharing stories, fostering cultural curiosity, and integrating the aspect of African diasporic life into classrooms and concert stages. So I'll stop there, as I know we have other conversations and discussions and questions probably also to engage with.
Thank you so much, Ashley. This was very impressive and a lot of interesting information. I guess most of it is everybody was able to look it up on the website. If it was a little bit too fast, if you want to look up special activities, otherwise you can ask and we send that to you directly and foster a direct conversation with you. I see one comment or a question in the chat concerning your your input, and somebody's asking about the publishing company. Maybe you can ask it directly.
I'm happy to drop it in the chat. For some reason, like, oh, there we go. Okay, it's called Rising Tide Music Press. In terms of the name of the publishing company that we are collaborating with for this project.
Okay, this was a question of Jaime. Are there any other questions directly linked to the presentation of Ashley? I don't see any. George have been putting some links in, but this was connected to former conversation. If not, I'll back Clemens on the stage. You're still with us, wonderful. And now we can open up the discussion, as Ashley said, a little bit broader, and maybe we can pick up topics you're interested in, you as a panelist, or all the other people listening during this panel, and you can write your questions directly in the chat. But Clemens, maybe you got something you want to pick up. I don't know whether you want to pick my question I mentioned after your first presentation, what happened to the musicians of the Ensemble Recherche during this journey, and did they change somehow, or what kind of learning had that been, and how does it go further maybe?
Yes, thank you. First, I think I would like to talk a bit more about curation and audience, because I think what Ashley just mentioned at the end of her really inspiring talk, thank you very much, Ash, was the presenting of context, and like this aspect of storytelling and kind of curate in a way that the audience feels welcome, and so that you provide all this this background. Maybe you could talk a bit more about this, and then we open also the conversation to George with the question in mind, how to reach out to like a more diverse audience, but also how to reach out to a let's say classical trained audience, and how to educate this audience, or how to engage with this audience.
Sure. For us, a lot of that really does have to do with age. So not that anyone above the age of 9 is a lost cause, but we really do try to work with elementary and young students, and have consistent presence with young students, as young students ultimately have connection to intergenerational families. So in terms of a kind of strategy, really investing in programming, we have something called edutainment recitals, which are a little bit tapas style or dim sum style, where it's a movement of this, a movement of that, and in the course of 45 minutes, you can engage with several centuries and several styles worth of music as it relates to African diasporic music making in this way, and be able to share out music as well as history, so the entertainment and the education sort of rolled into one. I think also what has been really engaging for our strategy is the interdisciplinary aspect. So treating my historians that are on my roster as valued partners, in addition to my string quartet chamber players and dancers and visual artists and spoken word, etc., as equal collaborators. Our creative in residence that we have are Shirley Graham Du Bois creative in residence. Shirley Graham Du Bois being a scholar, a composer, an activist, among many other things, and having lots of different touch points.
So it's also, let's say, transferring knowledge. So you try to have somehow a dialogue between art but also like academics and society in a way.
Yes, yeah, and by doing so, by inviting so many people to have a shared microphone, there will always be someone who's interested in the spoken word aspect, and someone who's interested in the history aspect, someone who's interested in the music making, someone who might be interested in the age engagement, and they all happen to be in the same space. And once you're in the same space, you're mine, kind of approach. So the I have a project that's with a farm coming up, in Black Indigenous farm, and we're collaborating on a program, which is a totally different audience that I would normally engage with. But again, once you're in the space, time to shine.
Thank you very much. Maybe George, you can also say something about this aspect of storytelling and giving context. How do you do? Okay. I think you need to.
Yeah, I muted myself. It takes me a little while. Let me say this. I think audiences are not isolated from the rest of the currents of cultural life. So when people come to hear a concert of Afro-diasporic new music, and I think this is something that you alluded to yourself, Clemens, that some people found it odd that some of these composers, the range of cultural references that they were interested in, and that somehow there was some sense that why would this person be interested in that? And so a lot of that is conditioned by these things are networked. So the audiences, the educational institutions, the historians, the journalists, the critics are all sort of working together. And the effect has been over the years to create this cone of silence, which we're currently trying to lift. And I'll give you an odd example. I had a piece performed in my other role as a composer, I had a piece performed by the Ensemble Contemporary, and nobody really wanted to admit that this is the first time they ever played anything by anybody Black, and that was 2019. But the thing that interested me about it was they were conducting, it was a concert of all 3 Black composers. I wasn't the only one, so they decided to do one, they decided to do 3, and I don't know. But in any event, I was listening to, because I do speak a little French, and I was listening to this guy. He was watching the conductor, and he was saying, well, look at the way this guy is conducting. He would never conduct this way if this were a real piece of contemporary music. And I was thinking, well, what is it about this? And I realized that this is the way this person had been conditioned to look at this work. In other words, that somehow we were outsiders to the project of La Musique Contemporaine. And so that meant that everything we did would be looked at through the lens of the outsider. Or another way to put it, what is it that these people are done that we have not already done? The kind of exotic other. the role which the Afro-diasporic people are expected to play. And so that becomes something where to tear that down and to establish a new we is going to take a more complex strategy than just saying, well, y'all come now. We stop discriminating and erasing now, and y'all come. So it might end up being something where you need to, well, one of my projects is this. When I worked with Ensemble Moderne in 2020 to do the Afro-diasporic composers concert and symposium, there was in November 2020, we did a 5-hour symposium with people like Björn Gottstein and Vimbai Kaziboni, all the composers, Jesse Cox and so on, Hannah Kendall. And then we did the concert, which was at Essen. And then I think there was a version of the Alta Oper, and then there was a version which I showed you from my talk in Berlin at I think it was at Philharmonie. And you know, the thing was, it reminded me of this. Can I share my screen for 1 minute? I tell you what it reminded me of. Let's see if I can show you this. I'm going to go ahead and share. Maybe it's not a good idea. I'm going to show you anyway. Everybody, can anybody see that? You see this? You know, if you want to call Connor racist, you have to read him first. And so the thing was that this guy who wrote this article in Neue Zürcher Zeitung was like, he was some sort of huge Kant expert, but he had no idea that there's been like 30 years of scholarship on Kant and race. So the thing is that what we need now, and this is something I think I want to do with ICE, we need new experts. The old experts aren't doing it for us anymore. People like this who don't have a sense of what has happened in the past, much less the future, need to be supplanted. So my reverie about the concert of Ensemble Moderne was that after it was over, you know, the handies were really ringing off the hook. You know, everybody saying, well, look, did you hear this concert by this Afro-diasporic music concert? Calling up a professor or a journalist, and the guy says, well, no, I didn't hear it. So, well, did you know anything about this kind of music? So, well, no. So, and they say, well, why not? You're supposed to be an expert. Maybe we need some new experts, some people who can really speak to these new experiences. And that's very threatening, because the old experts have become experts on the basis of telling everyone that they are the best and the brightest, and that what they've done represents, what they've written about, what they promote represents the full spectrum of what's going on in new music. And then you come along with Ensemble Recherche, you say no. Or Ash comes along and says, well, no, there's all this new stuff here. And so how do we get that out to the public? Well, we're going to need some new people to sort of say, well, here's what we're doing. And so that's my way of thinking about building new audiences, which is to make it be a collective project rather than leaving it to the audiences alone to just be astonished or mortified or surprised when they come in, to sort of work with everybody to create new education, because that's what we're doing as composers. We're as institutions, as ensembles, we're involved in a massive project of education to change the way people think about everything.
Yeah, thank you very much for pointing this out. I think that's really important, this expertise, because also like this curation is based on expertise. And maybe I could share the story that I had a conversation with Lucerne Festival. We were invited to perform the new string trio by Helmut Lachenmann. And it happened that it was also, I don't know, 70th birthday by Wolfgang Riem, and then it was also birthday by Dieter Ammann. And then they told me, well, could you please add a women composer, and if possible, some diverse, you know, people of color or whatever you can find. So I did some research. I gave them some names, some links. So they just had to look it up. And then they told me, well, I don't have the time to make this research, so we will just pick a woman composer we already know. So she was European, and I mean that's an example of a festival who just had diversity as a festival motto. You know, it was this year, and I think that's really an example which what is happening behind the scene in terms of expertise, that there are missing these people having this expertise of knowing other names than the current ones being public on stages of contemporary music. So
well, it's a long-standing problem. I mean, I read the articles about the diversity in the Lucerne Festival and the current intendant, who I first met in 1996. That's a long time ago. And so what I'm realizing is that perhaps he needed help. You know, as like I said in my own talk, a lot of these people don't want to admit they need help. So
yes,
what
but I
happened
think
was
that's
that
so important as an
Oakley,
institution, right?
well, it's true that, you know, but I guess that's hard if someone is really just holding on and they don't want to admit they need help. But as I wonder about, look at Oakley and Weser, who totally transformed the documenta and the world of visual art, you know, through co-curation strategies and by just being someone who reached out to other people, in addition to being from a different cultural background, being the first non-white curator, being Nigerian. And so I'm waiting for new music's Oakley and Weser, and someone who can admit that they need help and that they should go and get that help by making Ash the co-curator for the next one. That would be my suggestion, because she's already been curating behind the scenes over there. And so that would be, if I was running it, that's what I would do.
I'm flattered. I'm flattered. This reminds me a little bit of our conversation last night, which was some members of Ensemble Recherche and some members locally in Boston, and also well, Detroit virtually, but around the idea of how do we have these kind of co-collaborative experiences, and what could we envision, and therefore what can we take steps to actualize, and the idea of having sort of being mindful of from whose lips the words are spoken from and the ideas are spoken from. The idea of long-term relationship building, things start with relationships, and that takes time, which therefore takes dollars. But if we were able to have, for instance, with the Seattle Symphony that had cellist Seth Parker Woods as artist in residence, and you referenced Dr. Naomi Andre, who is also music historian in residence for the entire year, and to be able to provide that cultural competency, to be able to have a thought expert, a leader, to your point about sort of changing who is considered those leaders and those voices that we amplify, long-term embedded from the beginning, I think is really important.
Well, you know, I'm making a new experts conference. We got to get all of you guys together in the same space. That's going to be the only way to do it. You know, I don't know why I'm going to call it New Experts Conference, but more and more, that's what I'd like to do, you know, so that we can sort of come together, make a cool thing, and then explode outward toward everyone, and just bring all the new experts to a point, and so that everyone can have a look and see what the real future of curation could be.
I think Jaime just mentioned in the chat an important thing, that like as a curator, having this knowledge, that's basically your work and your capital. So if people are not acknowledging this work and not paying for your knowledge, then that's part of the problem, let's say. But I would also support George's idea that it's maybe better to have some co-curating person, or some like really person in charge who has a specific background and so on. But from what I see in Germany, this will take like a long time.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
you don't think so?
No, you know, I've been in, I mean, let's say on another note, you know, I've been involved for a little while in this Denkfabrik project for the House of Jazz, you know, in Berlin, which they want to do. And they've got the Alte Münze, I think, as a starting spot. And, you know, Harold Kusidu is also involved in this, and many other people. And they started with co-curation strategies from the very beginning. And they've got some pretty powerful curators in there, but no one tried to say, well, we're the only person. They all tried to come together. And so, and the thing about Ensemble Moderne, they could have said, well, you know, we'll curate the Afro-Diasporic concert, but they didn't. They reached out. So I don't think it's impossible. I think it just takes a little while. And one of the things I think you don't want to get discouraged about is that you have to find the people who your friends are, like Berno Odo Polzer, who did fantastic curatorial work, or Bonaventure Indico, you know, finding more who is now running the House of Culture and der Welt. I mean, finding more of these kinds of people and supporting them, and after a while, you generate a critical mass, you know, and you'll find that, and what you're doing is a prime example, Clemens. I mean, you know, I mean, maybe you could also have more curators if you wanted to. You just provide an example, you know, and I think you're already
actually,
doing
I would
it.
like to include Bongani in our discussion. Maybe Bongani, you could share your perspective, how it was for you to curate an ensemble like Ensemble Recherche, which is kind of like a dinosaur of contemporary music, dinosaur. So maybe you could.
Can we hear Bogani?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, good. I have just one comment to make, and it's from the African perspective, in that I'm hoping that with all these new collaborations and these new ideas on the table, we actually do not forget that there actually has been work done before. Right. On these efforts. I mean, I look at somebody like Akina Yuba, for instance, who passed away, but he had so many forums trying to bring composers of color together. There is an oboist in London, Uchenna Ngwe. I think you might know her, Ashley, but she was telling me about this vast archive of Black composers that's there, and it was music that was commissioned for, it was some sort of Biennale or something like that, I can't quite remember. But there have always been these efforts, these interventions in terms of commissioning new music from composers who are not European. But I think part of the process is finding out what's out there first, what could not be accomplished by people of Akina Yuba's generation, and then suppose building on that with these new resources that folks and these new networks that are now going to be formed or established.
So it's also a question of archive. Maybe that's could be another like general topic to talk about, and the question of canon. How to what's included, what's excluded in the canon of contemporary music, right? So, George,
well, I mean, I thought we kind of knew that already about what was excluded. So the thing is that really, whether a new canon is the answer, maybe there's not going to be a canon anymore like that. I mean, some people really believe in canons, you know, as being sites of power and influence. And but I prefer the current interregnum to a new canon. That is, nobody's in charge, and everybody is fighting and for change. And interregnum is where things get done. For example, you see it all the time. One of the things, Bongani, of course, knows this, that one of the things ICE is planning is an African art music project for which we would co-curate. I've already asked him, and I've already asked Kofi Agawu, and I'm probably going to ask other people like Martin Scherzinger or Johann Bass, or, you know, I mean, the thing is that those new experts who a lot of whom have been around a long time and are really archives in themselves, you know. So when you do that, you don't have to worry so much about canon. What you're doing is you're placing new work before the public. You're not knocking at the door and demanding that you be led into something which is going to take 10 to 20 years to make anyway. The canon is going to be something where people are suddenly, things are being heard that we're not hearing, that we haven't heard before. And it seems to me that that's more important to me right now than trying to create a new canon or something. I mean, canon formation is something that, I mean, the musicologists stopped thinking about it. So years ago.
Maybe let's not call it canon, but let's talk about repertoire. So Ashley, what's your attempt towards a repertoire? Do you think of like building a repertoire for Castle of Our Skins, which is possible to be repeated and so on?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And as we have this sort of Sankofa-like approach, which is to look back and to also move forward, we recognize, you know, it will take time to program 500 years worth of music, especially as we're continuing to create new music. And certainly with what we've done, which is unconducted chamber music, doesn't even scratch the surface to the full body of what is created, right? So we recognize that we are intentionally sort of activating a certain space, and then beyond that, want to make sure that we are able to have flexibility to be responsive to the now. So as much as I, as a violist, am partial to string quartets, that is by no means the fullness of what is a possibility for African diasporic music making, and we totally recognize that, right? So wanting to be able to be adaptable and flexible, and using a platform to engage and further spotlight and also inspire along the ideas of what is a possibility. And fortunately, there are just so many young, up and coming thinkers and creators. Really, the idea of composer as notation driven and sort of replicate as totally, and it's being expanded. So Jesse Cox was referenced, and someone that we've had pleasure of working with, and Elizabeth Baker and Yaz Lancaster, who I shared as well too. I mean, there's so many just amazing, brilliant minds doing amazing, brilliant things, and you know, I'm honored if I can jump on the bandwagon with them. So building that kind of community, which was, I think, also referenced before with your project, community building, is the work, and the result is what is sort of documented historically. Those musicologists who like to categorize and sort of put things in, but we're active. We're already in the flow of creating.
Thank you. Maybe Bongani, do you want to add a remark? I saw your hand is lifted.
Yes, so I just had to unmute myself. Also, we must be very careful that these interventions and these conversations are not only happening in the global north. I think we ought to, moving forward, find much more direct ways of engaging with the global south, ensembles like ICE, for instance, or Castle of Our Skins coming to Nigeria. But we need some form of direct on-the-ground engagement rather than keeping these things and these interventions in the capitals of the wealthy countries of the north.
That's right.
I'm for that. Let's talk.
Yes, we'd love to come out. We'd love to go back to Johannesburg.
On that front, in that front, George, actually, you might need to answer your emails on that topic.
Okay. Have I not answered in a while? I'm sorry. I
No,
often
it's just
fall behind, you know.
Yes, somebody was keen to talk to you about that topic on your. They sent you an email.
Maybe
really?
There's some question from our audience. I would like to address one issue concerning expertise, because in the list of names George mentioned earlier, it was only male experts of African music. So maybe because that was a huge issue when we were selecting composers from African continent, that there was one really great composer, Muntati Masebe from South Africa. She will also be performed tonight in Boston. But I think it's really a step which needs to be undertaken in the future to encourage female African composers. So maybe we could talk about this issue as well. Or maybe it's also a different topic in diaspora than in the global South or in South Africa. Or
It's an important topic. I mean, my research, I found finding women very difficult and problematic in terms of actually even putting on something like that, because we really don't want to put on a project which is heavily male dominated. And so, so the research has to be done. And that's why you bring in multiple curators and you ask them specifically those kinds of questions. And so you can actually eventually widen the circle. This is a methodological issue. I don't expect to be the only person who knows. I just said that. So, so we need to have more people who know. And if there's some names on the table right now, I'm all for it. So send those people. That's one of the things I like to do, and circulate those names. We try wherever possible to have, well, we're looking at it in terms of, which is to say that there's no margin, no center. There are only flows. They used this bass. Paul Gilroy once talked, his early research on talking about, the Black Atlantic, the circum-Atlantic notion of diaspora. But it turns, so going further than that, you start to find there's no originary home anymore, because everyone is circulating all over the world. Even a concept like the Global South in 30 or 40 years' time is going to disappear. And so we're going to have to think differently about flows, and not always about fixed locations and areas. So a lot of the people who did inhabit the Global South, their ideas, their sounds, their bodies are circulating all over the world. So we need to find those flows, find those people wherever they're flowing at the moment. And so I don't know how to do that alone.
I just dropped in the chat, and I don't know if Bongani, to put you on the spot, if you might know this. I just looked on Samro, which I know you had mentioned was this yesterday, and Montati Masibi is someone that we have also worked with Castle of Our Skins. But just looking on Samro, South African music, you can help me with the acronym, but an article around women's rights representation in the South African music sector. And Bongani, if there's other sort of information to pull up and share that you might know as well on this topic.
Well, Samra is going through an interesting transition at the moment. It used to be, it was established in the apartheid days, and it was basically a copyright collection society and also a composers society. Most of the composers were white. It funded a lot of commissions for white composers. And then during the transition to democracy in the late 90s, etc., they started, awarding commissions and things to people like me and Nandile Kumalo, etc. But now the classical music division, I think, has sort of like shut down. But what's important there is the archive that they have of South African compositions. And then secondly, they got some money from the US government to document and archive traditional music. So they transcribed a lot of traditional music. That's a very useful archive. But I think because of the financial situation that they're in, They are not thinking very much about classical music right now because, you know, their main business is copyright collection, etc. But there are other organizations in Africa. You look at, for instance, at Muson in Lagos in Nigeria, the Music Society of Nigeria. I engaged with them in 2005, and we did a concert with them when I was touring with my Canadian group back then. And of course, I mean, I went into Nigeria expecting the worst, I mean, from the airport and, you know, the security guards and everything else. And then when we came to that compound where they were, we were like flabbergasted. They had this beautiful hall called the Agip Recital Hall, named after one of the oil companies there. And this beautiful Bösendorfer, and it was an incredible space. I know that they do try to do some programming. Tunde Jegede, who's half Nigerian, half UK, sort of like, I think, had a curatorial role there for a year, and he's no longer there. But I mean, they are worth engaging. And I think perhaps we should try and build these networks, you know, from the global south to engage with the global north. I mean, I know it's a complicated conversation, etc. But there are these institutions that I think can be engaged with in the global south, and they have not necessarily had the means to do their work properly, but perhaps with new resources and new partnerships with organizations like ICE or Ensemble Recherche or Castle of Our Skins, maybe some projects, you know, can manifest out of that.
Thanks a lot. Maybe I can come back with my question from 1 or 2 hours ago, because I'm really interested in it. That's a question which is linked to Clemens and to Bongani. While I was listening to Ashley and to George about how broad their repertoire is, how many different ways of music they incorporate, how many styles the musicians can play, I'm wondering what this project means to the musicians of the Ensemble Recherche. You call themselves a dinosaur of contemporary music, and I guess, I'm not sure, that's a question, that this kind of project opens up the doors somehow, and in the meaning of challenging the musicians as well in the way how they connect and work together with the composers. So maybe you can say a few words about that, if you don't mind.
Yes, sure. I would also be interested in Bongani's outside point of view to this question. So first, I think it's difficult to speak about the ensemble as a entity, because it's really 8 individual characters, and everyone has really own biography and very own background. And most of them have also kind of migration background, some of them European, but also some of them from Japan or something, you know. So they at the same time they are in this history of avant-garde, let's say, of really German Darmstadt linked and so on avant-garde. And at the same time, they realized that this kind of neue Musik, new music is changing at the moment. So I think all of them are really open, and at the same time, there was at one point a interesting little dispute, or little, not fight, but there was some kind of challenging moment when one fellow said to the musicians, well, I don't think you are as open as you think you are, because the musicians, since they are engaged since decades in this field of contemporary music, they were kind of categorizing out things. So it was kind of, I don't know, some advanced technique, and then they said, this Lachenmann did this 20 years ago, and this sounds like this composer, and so on. And then at some point there was some moment of emancipation, let's say, that one composer from Colombia said, well, I don't want to be put in the box of this European composer because this is my own sound effect. This is not a Lachenmann thing. This is my own. And then we had this, we had a really interesting conversation about this idea of what's radical, what's innovation, and so on. So I think actually, as Ensemble Recherche, we are just at the very beginning of a longer process of redefining our identity. So I think this is just a little drop in the ocean, and we still need to learn a lot. So. Because we now perform like 10 pieces, but if you take these 10 pieces in reference to the more than 600 premieres they already did in the past years, in the past decades, it's not so much. So I think at one point we should reach I don't know, let's say a better balance between diverse composers. And then, as George pointed out earlier, the next step is also diverse musicians, diverse board members, and so on. And I'm very happy that we just found a viola from Brazil. So I think there are next steps to come concerning this this diversity of the ensemble itself. But maybe Bongani, what's your outside point of view? How did you perceive the musicians?
Well, I mean, I remember that recurring phrase that was always coming from the ensemble of challenge us a bit more, because they wanted to be challenged a bit more. And of course, that whole notion of what is radical that we talked about. But what I can remark on that really moved me, Clemens, was the generosity of spirit of the musicians. And as I said earlier, those one-on-one sessions that they had with composers were quite illuminating. And you know, coming from Africa, I know that some folks do not have access to players at that level. I remember, for instance, the demonstration on the oboe that the Ensemble Recherche oboist gave, and how curious everybody was about those multiphonics, et cetera, because again, we do not find players on this continent that can actually do those things. It was a really, I think, an incredible immersion into what is possible with extended techniques that folks do not usually work with. I remember Ayo, for instance, from Lagos, who was complaining as a composer that, you know, his music is usually played in a church context, and the audience tends to frown upon any sense of adventure or like something that sounds radical for him. So this was a liberating process and a learning process for most people. I know that for Montati as well. She had to revise her score several times, and I think you were happy with the last version. Again, this was a huge breakthrough for these composers, and thank you to your musicians for actually facilitating all of that.
And thank you for answering my question. I saw in the chat a question about the link to younger students, and Ashley, you already gave some advices. I think, or hopefully, Marla, that's information you needed. Is there anything else? Because we're coming to the end slowly. Clemens, is there something you want to point out, or some of the other panelists? No? So then it's time for me to say thank you to all of you. Thanks, Ash. Thanks, George. Thanks, Bongani. Thanks, Clemens. I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to record this panel as well as the one from yesterday. So people who came later or others who haven't had the time to be here lively have the opportunity to look that up. We're gonna put that on our website as soon as possible. as some other devices, like I said in the very beginning, some recordings from Boston-based ensembles and other stuff. And the one who are listening here from Boston in this panel, please feel free to come tonight at 8 o'clock to the 170 Beacon Street in Boston, our nice venue. Everything is prepared. There is the last rehearsal this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to hear all these pieces we were talking about. So once again,
yes, just maybe sorry to interrupt you, Jörg, but one little sentence about tonight's program, because there are 5 fellows on the program of the Postcolonial Research Project, and just the selection of these fellows underlines the political dimension of this project. Because, for example, we have one fellow from Iran, a female composer, and for her it was basically impossible to send us a video recording because the internet was shut down. But she sent us a recording, writing to me that she is not writing any positive success of her private life at the moment, because it's such a difficult situation in her country. But she wants to point out that this was the very highest step in her composer's career so far. But she is at the moment, she doesn't want to make this public because she's dealing with other things in her life. Another composer is Adrian Mukanu, a Ukrainian composer, who during the past year had to go west constantly, and just posted yesterday that his apartment in Kiev was bombed yesterday. So other people are, for example, Jabulo Fingula from South Africa, who had a really terrible flood in his region during the past year. It's a miracle that all these composers from the project somehow managed to compose these pieces, even if they were living in such circumstances which we just cannot imagine living in a well-fed country as living in Boston, Freiburg, or somewhere else in the US or Europe. So I think with these little video snippets, you will see tonight this context. But knowing these people for the last, or getting to know them for the last year, this somehow teach me so much also on emotional level what it means to be artist. So that's just a little remark for the end. So enjoy tonight's concert.
Yeah, thanks for this information, Clemens. I think this is very, very important to know and be aware that there are really different circumstances for artists to live in all around the world, especially Ukraine and Iran at that time. So once again, thank you for the for your wonderful inputs and inspiring discussion. Thank you to the audience for your participation. As you said, George, at one time, it's only one step for us as an institution as well. We are learning. We hope we go forward, and maybe the world of music is a little bit different in the next years if all of us are working on that. So thanks again for being with us, and goodbye to all of you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.